Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are jumping straight into the dramatic, cinematic, and honestly tragic sequence of events that defined World War I. We're going to look at how a seemingly isolated incident completely rewired the global order. Because if you really want to understand the modern world, you have to understand the mechanics of exactly how the globe went to war.
15 million. It's a staggering, almost incomprehensible number of lives claimed by this conflict. And what's absolutely wild to consider is that a single gunshot in a quiet European city was the immediate trigger for this unprecedented level of global devastation.
But this wasn't just some random, spontaneous eruption of violence. It was a ticking time bomb built over decades. So we're going to break this down into 6 key areas: building the powder keg, the deadly war trap, the spark in Sarajevo, the global war, America enters, and finally, the aftermath.
All right, let's start with part 1, building the powder keg, right in the heart of the Age of Empires.
So rewind to before the war. You've got these European nations fiercely expanding their borders, scrambling for territories across Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. In this era of imperialism, global dominance was literally the ultimate currency. If you wanted power, you needed land, and lots of it.
And what was driving all this? Economics. The Industrial Revolution was generating unbelievable wealth, but those massive new factories, they were hungry. They demanded constant raw materials and entirely new markets to sell to. So what started as basic economic competition rapidly mutated into this fierce, uncompromising global rivalry.
And they had the shiny new tools to enforce it all. We're talking steamships, railroads, telegraphs. These let empires dominate distant lands faster than ever before. Suddenly, a message that used to take months by ship takes minutes. The world was practically shrinking, which meant these massive expanding empires were suddenly bumping elbows and bumping into each other a lot more frequently.
But alongside this economic boom, there was a massive psychological shift happening. National pride was swelling everywhere, but it took a seriously dark turn. Fueled by cheering crowds and highly effective propaganda, people were conditioned to believe their specific country was inherently superior to everyone else. Basically, love for one's own country was weaponized right into hatred for the neighbors.
Which brings us to Section 2, the deadly war trap, and this massive web of alliances.
Looking for security, Europe essentially split itself into 2 heavily armed camps. You've got the Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy, squaring off against the Triple Entente, France, Russia, and Britain. And here's the crazy part. The monarchs of Britain, Germany, and Russia were literally cousins. Yet these treaties forged actual chains between their nations. Just one localized squabble could pull everyone straight over the cliff.
With those alliances locked in, the arms race absolutely exploded. Countries are building these massive standing armies, pouring absolute fortunes into their navies. There was a particularly intense naval buildup going on between Germany and Britain, and the psychological impact of that cannot be overstated. When you build a massive military machine like that, the mindset shifts. War wasn't something to avoid anymore, it was expected. They were actively bracing for a fight.
And all of these boiling tensions, they converged right in Eastern Europe. The Balkans became the absolute most dangerous place on earth, a literal powder keg. Here, rising Serbian nationalism fiercely clashed with the Austro-Hungarian Empire's desperate desire for control. And the kicker? Serbia had the backing of the massive Russian Empire. The stage was perfectly, terrifyingly set for a disaster.
Now, Section 3, the spark in Sarajevo, June 28, 1914. This is where we see that terrifying domino effect in action. Day 1, June 28th, Archduke Franz Ferdinand is assassinated. Now watch how fast the whole system collapses. By day 30, Austria declares war on Serbia. That immediately forces Russia to mobilize on day 32. Germany declares war on day 34. And by day 37, France and Britain are pulled right in. In just over a single month, one assassination plunged the entire globe into total war. It's just wild to think about.
Moving to Section 4, global war and the terrifying arrival of new weapons.
Any sweeping, romantic ideas of war very quickly sank right into the mud. Millions of soldiers found themselves completely bogged down in these complex, brutal trench networks. I mean, if you laid these trenches end to end, they could stretch around the earth. Battles like Verdun became enduring symbols of pure, unadulterated destruction, defined by freezing rain, relentless artillery, and tests of raw human endurance. And what made those trenches infinitely more deadly was that the brilliance of the Industrial Revolution was now being fully applied to killing. You had armored tanks rolling over the scorched earth, stealthy submarines prowling beneath the ocean's surface, and of course the silent, terrifying deployment of chlorine and mustard gas. It turned the very air they breathed into a weapon. The battlefield had basically become a mechanized slaughterhouse.
Let's look at Section 5, America enters the fight, completely shifting the balance.
So for years, America stayed out of it, but Germany's aggressive use of unrestricted submarine warfare completely changed the calculus. They started sinking civilian ships, most famously the Lusitania, which claimed American lives. You combine that blatant aggression with the infamous Zimmermann telegram, where Germany actually tried to ally with Mexico against the US, and America was finally forced out of isolationism. The USA mobilized its massive industrial might and deployed troops, fundamentally shifting the balance of power in Europe.
Finally, Section 6, the devastating aftermath in a shattered world.
After 4 unimaginable years of relentless bloodshed, an entirely exhausted Germany just couldn't fight any longer. On November 11, 1918, the dropping of weapons and the signing of the armistice brought this incredibly eerie, sudden silence to the battlefields. The Great War was finally over. But the consequences? Well, they were really only just beginning.
The immediate fallout was incredibly sobering. The aftermath left behind endless battlefields full of wooden crosses, completely ruined cities and global economies that were just shattered. And perhaps most critically of all, this all culminated in a deeply bitter, heavily punitive agreement known as the Treaty of Versailles. And what's absolutely chilling to realize about this is that the peace treaty didn't actually heal the world at all. By heavily punishing Germany and recklessly redrawing the map of Europe with very little regard for the actual people living there, it planted these deeply bitter seeds for another conflict. The Treaty of Versailles didn't end the violence. It essentially set the stage perfectly for World War II just 2 short decades later. You see, World War I wasn't just some historical event in a textbook. It was a blaring siren, a devastating warning about the dangers of unchecked nationalism, rigid alliances, and the brutal mechanization of conflict, a warning the world tragically failed to listen to the first time around. So I want to leave you with this final thought to consider. If history is indeed a warning, are we paying close enough attention to the echoes of the past today? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking questions and keep learning.